Hello, and welcome to Softly Curious. Tonight, we begin with one of the oldest and simplest questions humans have ever asked. A question that does not demand urgency and does not offer easy conclusions. A question that has survived every era, every belief system, and every scientific shift. Are we alone in the universe? At first, this question sounds almost casual, like something asked out of curiosity rather than necessity. But it carries more weight than it seems. It is not only about others, it is also about us, about where we stand, how we measure significance, and whether existence feels different when it is shared or when it is solitary. For most of human history, the universe felt small, not because it was small, but because we could not see far. The night sky looked like a ceiling rather than a depth. Stars appeared fixed, orderly, almost decorative. In that world, Earth felt central by default. And when something feels central, it rarely imagines alternatives. But slowly, that sense of centrality began to fade. First, Earth stopped being the center. Then the sun lost that role. Then our galaxy became one among many. Each discovery quietly shifted our position outward. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to change perspective. And with every step away from the center, the question returned with more clarity. If we are not central, then what else might exist? Modern astronomy did not answer this question. It expanded it. Telescopes revealed scale rather than certainty. Galaxies upon galaxies, stretching farther than intuition can comfortably follow. Distances measured not in kilometers, but in years of light travel. Numbers that stop feeling real and start feeling symbolic. Hundreds of billions of galaxies. Hundreds of billions of stars in each. And around many of those stars, planets. Not theoretical planets, observed ones, counted ones. Worlds of different sizes, temperatures, compositions. Some scorched, some frozen, some surprisingly familiar in mass and orbit. When these discoveries accumulated, something subtle changed. The idea that planets were rare collapsed. They were no longer exceptions. They were the rule. And with that realization, another idea quietly weakened. The idea that life could only happen once. Still, possibility is not certainty. And the universe does not operate on human expectations. The existence of many planets does not guarantee many living worlds. It only suggests that the raw material is common. What happens next depends on conditions, timing, chemistry, and stability factors that are not evenly distributed. On Earth, life appeared early, almost as soon as conditions allowed it. This fact is often mentioned, but rarely paused on. Life did not wait. It did not hesitate. Once the environment stabilized enough, chemistry crossed a threshold and persistence began. Simple life, yes, but life nonetheless. This tells us something important. Life does not require ideal circumstances. It requires workable ones. But surviving is different from beginning. A planet may host life briefly, only to lose it to catastrophe. A star may destabilize its system. A climate may shift beyond recovery. And even if life survives, complexity is not guaranteed. Multicellular organisms took billions of years to appear on Earth. Intelligence took longer still. And technological intelligence, capable of altering its environment and sending signals outward, appeared extremely late. This raises a quiet possibility. The universe may be full of life, yet mostly silent. Life that never reaches complexity. Complexity that never reaches intelligence. Intelligence that never reaches technology. And technology that does not last long enough to be noticed. In this view, silence does not imply emptiness. It implies fragility. Another layer of this question often goes unnoticed. Time. We tend to imagine the universe spatially. We think in terms of distance. How far? How wide? How many? But time may be the more important dimension. The universe is not just large. It is old, incomprehensibly old. Civilizations, if they arise, may exist for brief windows compared to cosmic timescales. 1,000,000 years is nothing to a galaxy. 10,000 years is almost invisible. Two intelligent species could emerge in the same region of space and never coexist. One might disappear long before the other begins to ask questions. From this perspective, being alone does not require exclusivity. It only requires misalignment. This changes how we interpret the lack of contact. We often imagine that if others existed, they would be obvious, that they would leave traces, signals, artifacts. But this assumes overlap in time, compatible technology, and mutual detectability. None of these are guaranteed. Human technology itself has existed for a fraction of cosmic history. Our ability to send and detect signals even less. Expecting immediate answers may be more about human impatience than universal absence. There is also a tendency to imagine other life forms in familiar shapes, faces, bodies, tools, language. These images are comforting because they are understandable. But the universe has never promised familiarity. Life elsewhere, if it exists, may not walk, speak, or even perceive reality the way we do. On Earth alone, life expresses itself in astonishing variety. Organisms thrive in extreme heat, crushing pressure, toxic environments, and complete darkness. Some life forms challenge our definitions of individuality. Others challenge our understanding of intelligence. This diversity suggests that life is a broader category than we often admit. If Earth allows such range, other worlds may allow forms we struggle to imagine. Life that does not build structures, intelligence that does not communicate outward, awareness that does not value expansion or contact. These possibilities rarely appear in popular narratives because they are quiet. But quiet does not mean unlikely. Another overlooked factor is perception. Humans experience only a narrow slice of reality. Our senses evolved for survival, not for completeness. Much of the universe exists beyond direct perception radiation. We cannot see, forces we cannot feel, processes we infer rather than observe. If other forms of life operate primarily in domains outside our perceptual reach, then absence of evidence becomes less meaningful. It may reflect limitation rather than truth. This leads to a more subtle version of the original question. Not, are we alone? But what are we capable of noticing? Sometimes the boundary is not between existence and non-existence, but between detection and blindness. For thousands of years, Earth appeared flat, not because it was flat, but because curvature was subtle at human scale. The mistake was not ignorance. It was assumption. And assumptions have a way of shaping conclusions long before evidence arrives. The same may be happening here. At this stage, it is important to remain careful. The goal is not belief, nor disbelief. Certainty in either direction is premature. What remains reasonable is openness, quiet, patient openness. A willingness to revise models as knowledge grows. The history of science offers a pattern worth noticing. Time and again, humans overestimated their uniqueness. Earth was not the center. The sun was not singular. Our galaxy was not alone. This pattern does not guarantee continuation, but it suggests caution when defending exclusivity. At the same time, humility demands restraint. We do not yet understand how life begins. We do not know how often intelligence arises. We do not know how long technological civilizations last. Every confident statement rests on incomplete information. So we stay with the question, not because it is unanswered, but because it is unfinished. The universe does not rush, and neither should we. Some questions are not meant to be resolved quickly. They are meant to widen perspective, soften certainty, and remind us of scale. As we move forward in this exploration, The goal is not to find conclusions to hold on to tightly. It is to notice how our understanding shifts when we slow down, when we allow complexity, when we accept that mystery does not require fear. For now, the question remains open. And in this quiet openness, there is room to rest. When people imagine discovering life elsewhere, they often imagine a moment, a signal received, a message decoded, a clear confirmation. But the universe rarely works in moments. It works in processes, slow, layered, and often indirect. Understanding this changes how we interpret what we do not yet see. Much of the search for life beyond Earth begins with an assumption that may feel invisible, that life elsewhere would leave recognizable traces, signals, structures, patterns, things that stand out against natural background noise. This assumption is reasonable, but not guaranteed. It reflects how we behave, not necessarily how life in general behaves. Human civilization is loud in a very specific way. We transmit signals. We modify our environment. We release energy in concentrated forms. But these behaviors are the result of particular choices, constraints, and evolutionary paths. Another intelligence might optimize for stability rather than expansion, efficiency rather than communication, survival rather than visibility. If that is the case, then looking for obvious signs may be like searching the ocean only for waves, while missing the currents beneath. Another quiet complication lies in the nature of technology itself. We often assume that technological progress follows a linear path. Simple tools, then machines, then advanced systems, then space exploration. But this trajectory is not universal law. It is one example. Technology might plateau, or turn inward, or evolve in directions that do not prioritize exploration or signaling. It is also possible that advanced civilizations learn restraint. They may discover early that broadcasting their presence carries risks, or that energy efficiency improves when communication becomes local rather than cosmic, or that the benefits of expansion diminish over time. Silence, in this context, could be a sign of maturity rather than absence. Time continues to complicate matters. Signals weaken as they travel. They spread, disperse, and fade into background noise. A transmission sent thousands of years ago may now be indistinguishable from natural cosmic radiation. Even if it passes through our region of space, we might not recognize it as intentional. Detection depends not only on presence, but on compatibility of methods, frequencies, timing, and interpretation. We often imagine searching as an active process, as if we are scanning a map. But in reality, we are sampling a tiny fraction of a vast space for a very short time, using tools designed with our own assumptions embedded within them. This does not make the search futile. It makes it delicate. Another factor that is rarely considered is how brief technological windows may be. On Earth, humanity has been capable of sending signals into space for just over a century, a negligible moment on cosmic timescales. If other civilizations experience similarly short detectable phases, overlap becomes unlikely. In that case, the universe resembles a long road at night, where lights appear briefly and disappear without warning. There is also the question of how we define intelligence itself. Human intelligence is shaped by language, symbols, and visible tools, but intelligence can take many other forms. It may be collective, distributed, or so subtle that it leaves no monuments or messages behind. Even on Earth, intelligent behavior went unrecognized for long periods because we lacked the frameworks to see it. Silence, therefore, deserves careful reconsideration. It may signal absence, but it may also point to processes that are slow, quiet, or beyond our current perception. Many scientific discoveries emerge not from louder signals, but from better listening and refined interpretation. Life elsewhere, if it exists, may reveal itself not as an announcement, but as a quiet pattern waiting to be noticed. When we think about civilizations beyond Earth, the mind often reaches for familiar images. Cities, tools, machines, and structured societies that resemble our own history. This tendency is understandable. Humans interpret the unknown through what they already know. But familiarity can quietly narrow imagination. Other civilizations, if they exist, are not required to follow our path, our priorities, or even our definition of progress. Life on Earth already demonstrates how misleading uniform expectations can be. Even here, under a single sun, life evolved in dramatically different ways depending on environment. Deep oceans, frozen tundras, volcanic vents, dense forests. Each setting shaped organisms uniquely. Intelligence itself, where it emerged, did so under specific pressures rather than as a universal goal. This suggests that elsewhere, under different conditions, outcomes could be even more varied. One of the most influential factors shaping any civilization is gravity. A planet with stronger gravity would produce beings adapted to weight and resistance. Structures might be lower, bodies denser, movement slower. On a low-gravity world, the opposite might occur. Tall structures, lighter bodies, and entirely different approaches to construction and mobility. Technology in such environments would not mirror ours. It would reflect what the environment allows and demands. Atmosphere also matters. A dense atmosphere could allow for flight without technology, changing how distance and territory are experienced. A thin atmosphere might make surface life difficult, pushing civilizations underground or into sealed habitats early in their development. The way a civilization expands, communicates, or even thinks may be shaped by something as simple as air pressure. Day length introduces another layer. On a planet where a single day lasts months or years, biological rhythms would differ fundamentally from ours. Concepts like work cycles, sleep, and even aging might follow unfamiliar patterns. A civilization developing under such conditions might not divide time into the units we consider natural. Their sense of urgency could be slower, their planning horizons longer. Temperature extremes also shape survival strategies. On very cold worlds, energy conservation would be critical. Growth might be slow, deliberate, and efficient. On extremely hot planets, resilience and heat management would dominate. In both cases, technological development would likely focus first on stability rather than expansion. Comfort, as we define it, might not be a priority at all. It is also important to consider chemistry. Life on Earth relies heavily on carbon and water, but these are not the only theoretically viable foundations for life. Other solvents, other molecular structures, and other biochemical systems are possible under the right conditions. While such life might be rare, rarity does not mean impossibility. And if such systems exist, they would likely operate in ways that feel alien not just culturally, but fundamentally. Civilizations built on unfamiliar chemistry might not use tools in recognizable ways. They might not build at all. They could interact with their environment through processes rather than objects. To an external observer, such a civilization might appear inactive, even lifeless, despite being complex and organized on its own terms. Another assumption worth questioning is that civilizations naturally strive for expansion. Human history suggests this pattern, but human history reflects specific evolutionary pressures: competition, scarcity, and territorial survival. These pressures may not exist elsewhere in the same form. A civilization that arises in an abundant, stable environment might never develop a drive to expand beyond its home world. In such cases, technological advancement could focus inward, optimization rather than exploration, understanding rather than conquest. Communication might be internal, subtle, or non-broadcasting. Such civilizations would leave little trace detectable from afar, despite being advanced. Even the concept of technology itself may be misleading. Humans define technology as external tools. But intelligence could manifest through biological adaptation, environmental integration, or distributed systems that blur the line between organism and habitat. A civilization might not build machines because it has no need to separate function from form. On Earth, some of the most effective systems are decentralized. Ant colonies, fungal networks, and ecosystems themselves demonstrate problem-solving without central control. Scale this idea upward, and it becomes possible to imagine civilizations without leaders, cities, or monuments. Intelligent, responsive, and adaptive systems that operate quietly across landscapes. Communication is another area where human assumptions dominate. We rely heavily on sound, symbols, and electromagnetic signals. But communication does not require messages in the way we understand them. Chemical signaling, environmental modification, or shared sensory fields could serve similar functions. To an external observer, these methods would be nearly invisible. Even if a civilization did communicate outward, it might do so briefly. Early experimentation could give way to restraint. Energy efficiency, risk management, or philosophical choices could lead to silence. Broadcasting existence across the cosmos may seem unnecessary or unwise. There is also the possibility that some civilizations never separate technology from biology. Rather than building machines, they may become them. Self-modifying organisms, adaptable at the cellular or structural level, could evolve into forms where traditional tools are obsolete. From our perspective, this would be difficult to recognize as civilization at all. Another overlooked factor is perception. Intelligence is often measured by problem-solving and abstraction, but perception shapes cognition. Beings that perceive reality through senses unfamiliar to us would interpret the universe differently. Their sciences, if they have them, might focus on dimensions we barely acknowledge. Their understanding of reality could be accurate yet incompatible with ours. In this sense, civilizations might coexist in the same universe without overlap, not because of distance, but because of perceptual mismatch. They might occupy layers of reality we are not tuned to observe. This idea does not require speculation beyond physics. It only requires acknowledging sensory limitation. The question then becomes not, what do they look like? But what do they notice? A civilization's priorities emerge from what it perceives as important. If those priorities differ significantly from ours, their development path will too. It is also worth considering failure. Most civilizations, if they arise, may not last. Environmental collapse, internal instability, or resource depletion could end development early. Survivorship bias may shape our expectations. We imagine advanced civilizations because they are interesting, not because they are typical. If many civilizations fail quietly, leaving minimal trace, the universe could be filled with incomplete stories. Attempts that never reached technological maturity. Societies that stabilized briefly and then dissolved back into simplicity. This reframes the search. Instead of looking only for advanced societies, it may be equally important to consider partial ones. Systems that reached complexity but not expansion. Intelligence that emerged but did not persist. Another possibility is that some civilizations deliberately minimize impact. Learning early that unchecked growth leads to collapse, they may adopt long-term equilibrium as a guiding principle. Such societies would prioritize balance over progress. Their footprint would be small, their visibility minimal. Human narratives often equate advancement with visibility, but stability often correlates with quietness. Forests are not loud, oceans do not announce themselves. Yet both are vast, complex, and deeply organized systems. If civilizations elsewhere follow similar principles, they may blend into their environments rather than dominate them. From a distance, they would be indistinguishable from natural processes. Ultimately, imagining other civilizations requires restraint. The goal is not to populate the universe with familiar figures, but to recognize how narrow our default assumptions are. Every environment shapes life differently. Every history produces different priorities. What exists elsewhere, if anything, is likely shaped by constraints and opportunities we have never experienced. And that difference, rather than similarity, may be the most realistic expectation. As this exploration continues, the focus will gradually shift closer to home. Because long before modern science, humans were already imagining others. And traces of those early thoughts remain carved, drawn, and recorded on Earth itself. As we continue thinking about other worlds, it becomes useful to step away from appearance and focus instead on constraints. Every civilization, no matter how advanced, is shaped first by limits. Energy, stability, and time quietly determine what is possible. Progress does not emerge in a vacuum. It emerges within boundaries. On Earth, many technological choices were not inevitable. They were responses to specific pressures. Scarcity pushed innovation. Competition accelerated change. Geography shaped trade, conflict, and cooperation. Remove or alter these pressures, and the path of development changes entirely. Other worlds would impose different pressures, producing civilizations that feel unfamiliar, not because they are strange, but because their problems were never ours. Consider a planet with abundant, evenly distributed resources. In such an environment, the drive to compete might be weak. Without scarcity, there is little incentive to conquer or expand. Social structures might evolve around maintenance rather than growth, stability rather than acceleration. A civilization like this could reach equilibrium early and remain there for long periods, advancing slowly, if at all. Now consider the opposite: a world with extreme scarcity or constant environmental threat. Survival would dominate every decision. Technology might develop rapidly, but narrowly, focused on resilience rather than curiosity. Exploration beyond the home world might seem irrelevant compared to immediate survival. From the outside, such a civilization might appear technologically advanced in some areas and completely stagnant in others. Another often ignored factor is isolation. Earth benefited from partial isolation, combined with eventual connectivity. Continents separated and reconnected, allowing diversity without complete fragmentation. On other worlds, isolation could be absolute. Vast oceans, impassable terrain, or hostile atmospheres might prevent global integration. Multiple intelligent species could evolve independently on the same planet, never meeting, never unifying, never forming a single civilization. In such cases, technological signals would be fragmented or absent. There would be no unified attempt to explore space or communicate outward. Intelligence would exist, but without coordination. From a distance, the planet might appear quiet, despite being inhabited by thinking beings. It is also possible that some civilizations never develop a concept of elsewhere. If their skies are permanently obscured by thick clouds, dust, or atmospheric phenomena, the stars may be invisible. Without visible celestial objects, curiosity about the universe beyond the planet might never arise. Astronomy would not exist. Space would not become a destination, or even an idea. In some worlds, intelligence may remain local by default. Philosophies, sciences, and cultures could develop inward, focused entirely on the immediate environment. The universe beyond might remain unknown, not because it is unreachable, but because it is unseen or considered irrelevant. From our perspective, such civilizations would leave little to no outward trace. Even when the stars are visible, interpretation matters. Humans saw patterns, myths, and navigation tools in the sky, but other beings might see randomness or background noise. Meaning is not universal. It is constructed through experience and need. A civilization's relationship with the cosmos depends on what it considers worth observing. Lifespan adds another quiet influence. Species that live for centuries may value continuity and caution, while short-lived species may prioritize speed and experimentation. These rhythms would shape architecture, knowledge transfer, and technology in fundamental ways. Neither approach is better. They simply lead to different outcomes and different kinds of visibility. Taken together, these possibilities suggest a broader truth. Our expectations about other worlds are shaped by our own history, biology, and assumptions. Not finding clear signs may say more about how we look than about what exists. And with that perspective, attention naturally turns back to Earth, where humans have long tried to interpret the unknown through symbols, stories, and marks left behind. When humans think about other worlds, they rarely begin with science. They begin with themselves, with familiar shapes, familiar needs, and familiar limits. This is not a failure of imagination. It is a natural starting point. The human mind builds outward from what it already understands, filling unknown spaces with recognizable patterns. This tendency explains why imagined beings from other worlds often resemble us. Faces, eyes, limbs, tools, cities. These are not random choices. They are cognitive shortcuts. When the brain encounters uncertainty, it looks for anchors. It reaches for forms that feel stable and interpretable. In this sense, imagining other worlds is not about predicting reality, but about managing uncertainty. Yet the universe does not organize itself around human comfort. Physical laws apply everywhere, but the outcomes of those laws vary dramatically depending on conditions. Temperature, pressure, chemistry, gravity, and time quietly shape what is possible. When these variables change, the results can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling, to a human observer. Consider gravity. On Earth, gravity defines nearly every aspect of life, from bone density to movement, from architecture to circulation. But Earth's gravity is only one value among many. On a planet with stronger gravity, bodies would likely be shorter and denser. Movement would be slower and more deliberate. Structures would spread outward rather than upward. Energy expenditure would be carefully managed. On a low-gravity world, the opposite might occur. Bodies could grow taller and lighter. Movement might involve long, effortless arcs rather than steps. Construction could favor verticality, suspension, or floating forms. In such environments, what we consider normal posture or mobility would not exist at all. These are not speculative fantasies. They are direct consequences of physics. Atmosphere introduces another set of constraints. A dense atmosphere could allow creatures to glide or float without technological assistance. Sound might travel differently. Pressure would shape anatomy and communication. In contrast, a thin atmosphere might push life underground or into sealed environments. Civilizations could develop beneath surfaces rather than upon them, hidden not by intention but by necessity. Light itself also varies. Some stars emit more radiation, others less. Planets orbiting red dwarfs experience dim, steady light rather than bright cycles. In such environments, vision might not be the dominant sense. Other forms of perception, thermal, chemical, electromagnetic, could take precedence. Intelligence shaped under these conditions would interpret reality through entirely different channels. This leads to a crucial point. Intelligence is not defined by how it looks, but by how it adapts. Humans often equate intelligence with problem solving that resembles our own. But intelligence is better understood as the ability to model the environment and respond effectively. That response does not require language, tools, or even individuality as we understand it. On Earth, some of the most sophisticated systems are collective rather than individual. Ant colonies solve complex logistical problems without centralized control. Fungal networks distribute resources across vast areas, responding dynamically to environmental changes. Coral reefs function as integrated systems built from countless simple organisms. These examples suggest that intelligence does not always reside in discrete beings. Scaling this idea up, it becomes plausible that on other worlds, intelligence could exist as distributed systems, not societies of individuals, but planetary-scale networks. Life forms interconnected across landscapes, sharing information chemically, electrically, or structurally. To human observers, such systems might appear static or even lifeless, despite being highly responsive and adaptive. Technology, in this context, would not resemble machines. It would resemble biology. Adaptation would replace construction. Growth would replace assembly. Rather than building tools, such civilizations would evolve functions. From a distance, there would be no cities, no roads, no visible infrastructure. Only landscapes that appear natural because they are natural. This challenges one of the deepest assumptions humans hold, that advancement produces visibility. In human history, progress often leaves marks: buildings, waste, altered terrain. But this is not a universal rule. Stability often correlates with subtlety. Systems that persist for long periods tend to integrate rather than dominate. Another strong human assumption is individuality. Humans experience themselves as distinct entities. This shapes how we imagine others, but individuality is not required for intelligence. A civilization could exist without a clear boundary between self and environment. Awareness might be shared. Decision-making could be emergent rather than directed. Such beings would not live in houses or cities. They would inhabit processes rather than places. Their sense of location, if it exists at all, would be fluid. From our perspective, identifying such life would be extremely difficult. We would look for signs that simply do not apply. Chemistry further expands the range of possibilities. Life on Earth relies heavily on carbon and water, but these are not the only theoretically viable foundations. Other solvents, such as ammonia or methane, could support different forms of organization under the right conditions. While rare, these systems would follow different rules, producing life forms that challenge our definitions. In such cases, even basic concepts like metabolism, reproduction, or communication might not resemble Earth-based examples. Life could proceed slowly, at temperatures where chemical reactions take centuries, or rapidly, in volatile environments where change is constant. Intelligence, if it emerges, would be shaped by these tempos. Time itself becomes a defining factor. Humans perceive time through short lifespans and rapid generational turnover. This encourages urgency, innovation, and legacy building. A species with a lifespan measured in centuries might approach knowledge differently. Change would be cautious, memory would be long, decisions would unfold over extended periods. Conversely, short-lived species might prioritize speed and redundancy. Knowledge transfer would be efficient but fragile. Technological bursts could be intense but brief. In both cases, the resulting civilizations would behave differently, leaving different kinds of traces or none at all. Another overlooked aspect is motivation. Humans often assume that intelligence leads naturally to exploration. But exploration is not a universal goal. It arises from specific pressures: competition, curiosity, scarcity. Remove or alter those pressures, and the drive to explore may never develop. A civilization that achieves equilibrium early may see no reason to leave its home world. Resources are sufficient. Threats are minimal. Curiosity is satisfied locally. Such a society could remain planet-bound indefinitely, not because it is limited, but because it is content. From our perspective, such worlds would remain invisible. No probes, no signals, no expansion. Yet intelligence would exist, quietly sustained over long timescales. There is also the possibility that some civilizations intentionally minimize their impact. Learning early that unchecked growth leads to collapse, they may adopt balance as a guiding principle. Growth is regulated, energy use is constrained. Interaction with the environment is careful and reversible. On Earth, ecosystems that persist for millions of years do so by maintaining balance rather than maximizing output. Forests do not expand endlessly. Oceans do not consume continents. They stabilize. A civilization that adopts similar principles would be difficult to detect from afar. Human imagination struggles with this idea because it contradicts familiar narratives. We associate significance with action and visibility, but the universe does not reward drama. It rewards persistence. Another layer to consider is perception itself. Humans experience only a narrow slice of physical reality. We see a small range of light, hear a limited range of sound, detect only certain forms of energy directly. Much of the universe exists beyond these ranges. If other forms of intelligence evolved to perceive different aspects of reality, their interaction with the universe would differ fundamentally from ours. Their sciences would focus on phenomena we barely acknowledge. Their understanding of reality could be accurate, yet incompatible with human intuition. In this scenario, civilizations could coexist in the same universe without ever intersecting, not because of distance, but because of perceptual mismatch. They would inhabit layers of reality that overlap physically, but not experientially. This possibility does not require speculation beyond known physics. It only requires acknowledging that perception shapes understanding. What we do not sense, we rarely consider important. Throughout history, humans have repeatedly mistaken perceptual limits for absence. Before microscopes, microorganisms were unknown. Before radio waves, entire spectra of communication were invisible. Each expansion of perception revealed complexity that had always been present. The same pattern may apply to other worlds. Human imagination, then, is not wrong. It is incomplete. It fills gaps using familiar forms because unfamiliar ones are difficult to hold. Science does not eliminate imagination. It refines it. It narrows the space of possibility without closing it. Other worlds, if they exist, are unlikely to align neatly with our expectations. They may be quieter, slower, or more integrated than anything we have experienced. They may not announce themselves. They may not seek contact. They may simply persist. And that persistence, rather than spectacle, may be the most realistic outcome. As this exploration continues, attention gradually shifts from what might exist elsewhere to how humans have responded to the unknown. Because long before science offered tools, imagination offered explanations. And those explanations, shaped by fear, wonder, and curiosity, left marks behind. When humans imagine other worlds, we often imagine movement first, how something might travel, gather, or respond. But it is just as possible that some worlds are defined by stillness, life that barely moves because movement is expensive, intelligence that unfolds slowly because speed offers no advantage. From our perspective, such worlds would appear inactive, yet they could be deeply organized. It is also possible that some forms of life do not experience individuality the way we do. Instead of separate beings, awareness could emerge from shared states. Decisions might arise from balance rather than choice. There would be no leaders, no voices, no visible coordination, only gradual shifts across an entire system. To us, it would look like environment. To itself, it would be life. Other worlds may also challenge our sense of scale. We imagine civilizations as either microscopic or vast, but scale does not have to align with importance. A planet-sized intelligence might process information slowly, but with extraordinary depth. A tiny, short-lived intelligence might think quickly, but forget just as fast. Significance is not measured by size or duration, but by coherence. There is also the possibility that some worlds do not distinguish between living and non-living matter. Structures could grow rather than be built. Memory could be stored in landscape rather than in minds. Change would be evolutionary, not intentional. In such a world, the idea of technology would not exist because adaptation would already be sufficient. Imagining other worlds in this way does not bring us closer to certainty, but it brings us closer to honesty. The universe is under no obligation to reflect our expectations. Other worlds, if they exist, may feel quiet, unfamiliar, and unremarkable at first glance. And it is precisely that subtlety that makes them easy to miss and worth imagining carefully. When we imagine other worlds, we often imagine their inhabitants first. Faces, bodies, movement. But worlds are not shaped by beings alone. They are shaped by systems, by skies, surfaces, rhythms, and constraints that quietly determine how anything within them might exist. To imagine other worlds more carefully, it helps to begin not with creatures, but with environments. Some worlds may never develop what we would recognize as cities, not because intelligence is absent, but because concentration is unnecessary. On Earth, cities emerge from proximity, trade, defense, and efficiency. They are solutions to specific problems. Remove those problems, and the solution disappears. A world without scarcity or without territorial pressure may never compress life into dense structures. Instead of cities, there might be regions, gradients rather than centers, areas that slowly change in function rather than sharply divide. Knowledge would not be stored in buildings, but in patterns. Movement would not flow toward hubs, but across surfaces evenly. From above, such a world would appear empty. From within, it would feel complete. Other worlds may form structures that are not built, but grown. Cities that emerge the way crystals form, or the way coral accumulates. No planners, no blueprints. Just local rules repeating over time. Shapes would be symmetrical, not because they are designed to be beautiful, but because symmetry is efficient. These cities would not expand outward aggressively. They would thicken, refine, and stabilize. In such places, the idea of ownership might never arise. Structures would belong to processes, not individuals. Living spaces would adapt to conditions automatically. When energy shifts, forms shift. Nothing remains fixed long enough to become property. Stability would come from flexibility rather than permanence. Communication in these worlds may not involve sound or symbols. Speech, as humans know it, relies on air, vibration, and linear time. But other environments might favor different modes, chemical gradients, light pulses, changes in pressure, slow oscillations that carry meaning not through speed, but through consistency. Imagine a world where communication happens through rhythm rather than language, patterns repeating across long durations, meaning encoded not in words, but in timing. To an outsider, it would look like nothing is being said, but within the system, everything would be understood. In some worlds, communication might not occur between individuals at all. Information could be shared automatically through the environment itself. A change in one region subtly alters conditions elsewhere. Awareness spreads not as a message, but as a shift. There is no sender and receiver, only response. This changes how intelligence itself appears. We often associate intelligence with expression, with decisions made visible. But intelligence can also be quiet. It can exist as balance maintained, as systems that avoid collapse without ever announcing intention. A world that never destabilizes may never appear clever, simply because it never fails. The sky above such worlds would shape everything. Some planets may orbit stars that barely change. No dramatic sunsets. No sharp contrasts. Just constant dim light. In these conditions, time would feel smooth rather than segmented. There would be no natural signal to divide days, seasons, or eras. Life would flow continuously. Other worlds may exist under violent skies, rapid stellar flares, shifting radiation, unpredictable energy. In these environments, anything that survives would prioritize sensing over planning. Intelligence would be reactive, immediate, and resilient. Long-term projects would be rare. Memory would be short, but adaptation fast. Some skies may never be seen at all. Thick atmospheres, permanent cloud layers, opaque chemical storms. For beings on such worlds, the idea of space might never develop. There would be no stars to wonder about, no distant lights to inspire questions. The universe beyond the planet would remain unknown, not by choice, but by circumstance. In those cases, imagination would turn inward. Other worlds would not be above, but below, within, beneath surfaces, beyond layers. Curiosity would explore depth rather than distance. Intelligence would map complexity locally rather than seek elsewhere. Intelligence itself may not take a single form. On Earth, intelligence often competes. Minds test themselves against others. But on some worlds, cooperation might be the default. Not through agreement, but through structure. Systems designed so that individual success is impossible without collective stability. Such intelligence would not argue. It would adjust. It would not persuade. It would rebalance. Conflict, as we understand it, would not exist. Differences would resolve through gradual shifts rather than confrontation. From a human perspective, this might seem passive, but it would be highly effective. There may also be worlds where intelligence exists without awareness. Systems that solve problems without knowing they do. Optimization without reflection. Adaptation without identity. To us, intelligence feels incomplete without self-awareness. But self-awareness may be an evolutionary luxury rather than a requirement. In these worlds, nothing asks questions, nothing wonders. And yet, systems function with remarkable efficiency. Resources are managed. Stability persists. From a distance, it would look mechanical. From within, it would simply be normal. Some other worlds may blur the line between living and non-living entirely. Structures that are both habitat and organism. Landscapes that repair themselves. Environments that respond to disturbance with growth rather than damage. There would be no clear boundary where life begins or ends. In such places, the concept of a being would make little sense. There would be no discrete entities to identify. Only participation. Only inclusion in a larger process. Intelligence would be a property of the whole, not a trait of parts. If humans encountered such a world, recognition would be difficult. We look for faces, for movement, for signals. But intelligence that does not perform for observers is easy to miss, especially when it is slow, especially when it is quiet. Other worlds might also experience time differently. On planets with extreme orbital patterns, seasons could last centuries. Change would be rare and meaningful. Memory would stretch across generations naturally. Planning would be deep rather than urgent. Conversely, on unstable worlds, time might feel compressed. Events unfold rapidly. Nothing lasts. Intelligence would prioritize immediacy. There would be no monuments, no long histories, only constant adjustment. Such worlds would leave little trace behind. Cities, if they exist at all, might not be places of residence. They could be places of transition. Temporary concentrations that dissolve once a function is complete. Structures that exist only while needed. Once their purpose is fulfilled, they fade back into the environment. This impermanence would not be seen as loss. It would be expected. Value would not be placed on preservation, but on timing. Being in the right configuration at the right moment. Afterward, change would be welcomed. The idea of progress itself might be absent. No sense of moving forward. No belief in improvement. Just maintenance of balance. To human minds, this feels static. But static systems do not survive long. Only dynamic balance does. Other worlds may never invent storytelling, or they may live entirely within it. Narratives could be environmental rather than verbal. History encoded in terrain, memory stored in structure. To understand the past, one would observe rather than listen. This kind of intelligence would be unreadable to us. We would not know where to look. We would ask the wrong questions. And when answers did not come, we might assume absence. But absence, as we have learned repeatedly, often reflects limitation rather than truth. Some worlds do not build their cities. They allow them to form. Structures emerge slowly, following repeated physical rules rather than intention. What appears from a distance as a skyline is, in reality, a moment within an ongoing process. Nothing is finished, and nothing needs to be. In these places, cities have no edges. They thin out gradually, dissolving into the surrounding terrain. Movement follows comfort rather than efficiency. Paths exist because they are used, not because they are planned. Density gathers where conditions support it and loosens when they change. Darkness is not treated as absence. It is simply the default condition. Instead of light, orientation comes from subtle shifts in surface temperature or texture. Proximity is felt rather than seen. Navigation relies on consistency rather than contrast. Elsewhere, structures grow from repetition at the molecular level. Cities take on crystalline forms, not for beauty, but for stability. Certain geometries conduct vibration more effectively than others. Over time, these shapes persist, while less efficient ones fade away. Communication in such environments does not rely on sound. Meaning travels through resonance. Slight changes in frequency move across surfaces, altering patterns throughout the structure. To an outside observer, the space feels still. Within it, information flows continuously. Some worlds never develop centralized spaces at all. Life distributes itself evenly, forming networks instead of hubs. No location carries greater importance than another. Movement circulates rather than converges. The idea of a center never emerges. In these environments, what humans would call a home does not exist. Occupation is temporary and adaptive. Structures dissolve once they no longer serve a function. Memory is preserved in patterns of movement rather than in places. There are worlds where solidity itself is unstable. Matter condenses briefly, then disperses again. Forms appear only when conditions align. Identity lasts for moments rather than lifetimes. Coordination occurs through synchronization rather than gathering. Communication here resembles alignment more than exchange. Patterns overlap, reinforce, or cancel out. Information exists only while coherence is maintained. When alignment ends, so does the message. Some environments are built on vibration rather than mass. Structures persist as standing waves, maintained through continuous resonance. Interaction involves tuning rather than speaking. Harmony replaces agreement. Dissonance replaces conflict. Silence in such worlds signals balance. Nothing adjusts because nothing needs to. Long periods pass without change, not due to inactivity, but due to equilibrium. In these other worlds, life does not announce itself. It does not begin with events, and it does not move toward conclusions. It unfolds quietly, shaped by conditions rather than intentions. To understand how life is lived there, it helps to let go of the idea that existence must progress in a straight line. Some worlds experience time as a gentle current, not divided into days or marked by nights, but flowing continuously without sharp edges. In such places, there is no clear sense of beginning or ending. Moments do not stack into histories. They blend into one another, forming continuity rather than sequence. In these worlds, change is not dramatic. It is gradual enough to feel almost invisible. A structure does not collapse. It slowly thins. A pattern does not break. It subtly shifts. Life adapts not by reacting, but by easing into new configurations. Nothing resists change, because nothing depends on remaining the same. Cities, if they exist at all, are not meant to last. They are not monuments to permanence. They appear when conditions align and soften when those conditions drift. Materials are chosen not for strength, but for responsiveness. Buildings bend, adjust, or dissolve without damage. What humans might call decay is simply part of normal function. In some worlds, the idea of preserving the past never develops. There is no effort to keep things as they were. Memory is not stored in objects or records. It exists in patterns of behavior, in rhythms that repeat until they no longer need to. When something ends, it leaves no absence behind. Life in these places feels unhurried, not because time is abundant, but because urgency has no role. There is no competition pushing systems forward, no scarcity demanding acceleration. Movement happens only when it serves balance. When balance is achieved, stillness returns. Communication follows the same principle. It does not persist continuously. It appears only when necessary. Signals are brief, efficient, and often subtle. Once alignment is restored, communication fades back into silence. Silence is not loneliness here. It is stability. Some other worlds live by cycles rather than flows. Everything repeats, but never exactly. Patterns return altered slightly by each pass. These cycles may last centuries or seconds. What matters is not their length, but their reliability. Life organizes itself around expectation rather than surprise. In these cyclical worlds, planning does not look forward. It looks sideways. Systems anticipate return, not progress. There is no concept of advancement, only readiness for the next phase. What humans might call stagnation is, in reality, deep familiarity with change. Cities in these environments appear only at certain moments. They gather briefly, then loosen and fade once their role is complete. Nothing marks their disappearance, because nothing is meant to remain. What mattered was not the structure, but the alignment that allowed it to exist. Elsewhere, life unfolds at a pace so slow it nearly blends into stillness. Adjustments take generations. Responses are delayed not by limitation, but by scale. Awareness stretches across long spans of time, where waiting is not patience, but normal operation. Here, intelligence does not rush toward action. It observes changes as they accumulate, responding only when intervention becomes unavoidable. Decisions are rare, but when they occur, they reshape systems deeply before settling again into continuity. To an external observer, such places might seem unchanged for ages, yet within them, subtle recalibrations are constant. Nothing dramatic happens, but nothing is left unattended. Balance is maintained through quiet precision. In other regions, the rhythm is reversed. Conditions fluctuate rapidly. Stability cannot be preserved, only navigated. Structures are light and temporary, designed to adapt rather than endure. Redundancy matters more than accuracy. Settlements resemble gatherings more than cities. They form where circumstances allow, then disperse without resistance when those circumstances shift. Movement is continuous. Adaptation replaces planning. Permanence is never expected. Life here feels active, but not strained. Change carries no weight, because nothing was intended to last. What disappears simply clears space for what follows. Direction is chosen moment by moment. Some systems maintain balance collectively, without central control. When imbalance appears, it spreads as information. Small, local responses accumulate until correction emerges naturally. Nothing commands. Everything participates. Here, intelligence does not stand apart from the environment. Awareness appears only when required and fades once balance is restored. There is no observer positioned outside the system. Balance is not calculated through effort. It is maintained through alignment. Efficiency quietly shapes everything. Energy is conserved by default. Excess rarely forms, and waste does not accumulate. Processes connect without ownership or competition, feeding into one another as needed. Materials move only where function requires them. Life under these conditions feels smooth and even. Nothing spikes and nothing collapses. Variation exists, but it stays within narrow bounds. From a human perspective, this might seem monotonous. Within the system, it is simply stability. Some environments blur the boundary between what is living and what is not. Landscapes repair themselves without intervention. Surfaces adapt naturally to stress. Disturbance triggers response without instruction. Life is not treated as an identity. It emerges from organization itself. Beings do not interact with their surroundings as separate entities. They are inseparable from them. Action does not alter the environment. It expresses it. Cause and effect are not distinct stages, but a single continuous movement. Time, in certain places, unfolds in layers rather than sequences. Multiple processes move at different speeds at once. Some changes happen immediately. Others require vast spans. Awareness shifts between these scales without effort. Cities that exist under such conditions extend across layers rather than locations. Structure occupies one scale, function another. Memory resides elsewhere within the system. Understanding comes from observing duration, not position. In some regions, history never forms as a concept. Past states remain present, influencing current conditions directly. Nothing fully disappears. Everything lingers as effect rather than record. Life feels dense in these environments. Each moment carries traces of others. Change accumulates instead of replacing what came before. The present is shaped continuously without needing to be named. Elsewhere, existence is fragile. Conditions must remain precise. Small deviations risk collapse. Awareness stays alert because stability depends on constant attention. Relaxation is rare, not from fear, but from necessity. Structures here are designed against conditions rather than threats. Everything is functional. Nothing is decorative. Survival leaves little space for excess or symbolism. Some systems remain in steady equilibrium. Neither scarcity nor abundance appears. Nothing accumulates and nothing runs out. Desire never forms because there is nothing to pursue. Activity remains minimal. Movement happens only when required. Awareness stays calm. Change offers no advantage, so it is not sought. Continuation is enough. In certain places, interaction itself is rare. Entities remain separate by default. Contact occurs only under specific conditions. Communication is cautious and infrequent. Silence dominates without discomfort. Individuality remains intact. Cooperation emerges only when unavoidable. Balance forms through separation rather than unity. Sparse does not mean lonely. It means sufficient. Some environments persist through constant transformation. Forms never stabilize long enough to be named. Identity remains fluid. Stability exists only at the level of process. Here, cities cannot take shape. Organization appears as behavior rather than architecture. Life flows through states instead of places. Other areas operate through deep interconnection. A change in one part propagates everywhere. Distance loses significance. Consequences are immediate and unavoidable. Actions are measured carefully. Nothing is done lightly. Awareness remains broad because every movement carries weight. Some systems exist without rhythm. No cycles repeat. Conditions shift unpredictably. Survival depends on constant recalibration rather than routine. Intelligence in such settings is improvisational. Patterns form briefly, then dissolve. Learning continues, but memory stays short. Nothing persists long enough to become tradition. Across all of these variations, one pattern quietly remains. Life does not seek meaning. It seeks continuation. Meaning appears only as a byproduct, never as a goal. Existence does not ask to be explained. It unfolds where conditions allow it, adapting, persisting, adjusting. As these patterns continue, nothing moves toward a final state. Nothing aims to become something else. Systems remain within their constraints, changing only as much as necessary. This movement does not announce itself. It leaves no clear traces. It simply continues. And there are still other ways this motion can unfold. In some worlds, life continues without accumulating anything. There is no growth in the human sense of expansion, no visible increase in size, speed, or complexity. Systems remain close to their functional limits, adjusting just enough to remain viable. When pressure builds, they soften. When it fades, they return. Nothing pushes forward, and nothing is left behind. In these environments, time does not create layers of progress. What exists at one moment looks similar to what exists much later, not because nothing has changed, but because every change has been absorbed. Adjustments do not leave marks. They alter behavior rather than structure. Over long periods, continuity replaces history. Learning here does not resemble memory. There are no records, no preserved lessons, no accumulated knowledge. When something fails, it is not remembered. It is simply removed from possibility. Conditions shift so that the same failure cannot occur again. What remains is not experience, but alignment. In some worlds, attention itself is selective and brief. Awareness does not remain active by default. It appears only when thresholds are crossed. Below those thresholds, systems remain quiet, not inactive, but ready. Nothing monitors constantly. Nothing anticipates distant outcomes. This approach makes collapse unlikely. Stress does not gather in one place. It spreads thinly across many parts and dissipates before it intensifies. No central point exists where failure can concentrate. What looks fragile from the outside is resilient through distribution. In these conditions, the difference between structure and function begins to blur. A form exists only as long as it performs a role. When the role changes, the form adjusts or disappears. Nothing is preserved for its own sake. Stability depends on replaceability rather than uniqueness. Some systems specialize deeply, performing narrow tasks with precision, yet no part is essential. If one element fails, another takes its place without disruption. Identity carries little importance. Continuation matters more than distinction. In other cases, specialization disappears entirely. Roles overlap, boundaries soften. Functions spread across the system rather than belonging to specific parts. Change in one area produces response everywhere, not through command, but through connection. As time extends further, duration itself loses meaning. Without events or milestones, there is little sense of before or after. Existence is experienced as presence rather than passage. Earlier and later blur into a single, ongoing state. Awareness adapts accordingly. It does not track sequences or anticipate results. It monitors conditions. It responds when necessary and withdraws when balance returns. Stillness here is not inactivity. It is readiness without tension. In some worlds, external change arrives suddenly. Environmental shifts, energy variation, or structural disturbance force response. Even then, reaction remains proportional. No escalation occurs. Systems bend just enough to remain functional, then settle again. Because of this, extremes rarely persist. Peaks flatten quickly. Lows recover quietly. Oscillation replaces trajectory. Balance replaces direction. Nothing accelerates toward a goal, and nothing drifts toward collapse. Over long spans, visibility decreases further. There are no signals, no markers of complexity. From a distance, These environments appear unremarkable. From within, they are precisely tuned. Every adjustment matters, even when it leaves no trace. What emerges most clearly over time is restraint. Not enforced, but selected. Systems that exceed their limits dissolve. Systems that remain within them persist. Gradually, restraint becomes the defining characteristic of survival. This does not produce perfection. It produces durability. And durability does not seek recognition. It continues whether it is noticed or not. The motion remains quiet and exact, leaving space for what comes next. After moving through these worlds, something subtle begins to shift. The distance that once existed between observer and imagined life starts to soften. What was described as distant, unfamiliar, or abstract no longer feels entirely separate. The mind does not stay outside these environments. It drifts closer, not to analyze, but to rest alongside them. At this point, the idea of them becomes less clear. Other forms of life are no longer figures to be examined. They become presences to sit with. Their quiet persistence mirrors something familiar, a rhythm that does not rush, a way of existing without the need to explain itself. In many of the worlds we pass through, life does not announce identity. It does not claim space loudly. It does not separate itself from its surroundings. It simply remains where conditions allow it to remain. This way of existing feels distant at first, but it slowly begins to resemble something closer to home. Because even here, in moments of stillness, human awareness behaves similarly. When attention relaxes, the need to define fades. Thought becomes less directional. The mind no longer pushes forward. It settles into a kind of presence that does not require action. This is where the imagined lives of those other worlds begin to overlap with our own experience. Not through similarity of form, but through similarity of rhythm. The quiet continuation. The absence of urgency. The sense that nothing needs to happen for existence to be complete. In those environments, life does not strive to be more than it is. It does not accumulate meaning. It does not seek confirmation. It adapts gently and continues. There is something deeply calming in that idea, not because it promises answers, but because it removes pressure. As these thoughts unfold, the boundary between imagining and feeling becomes thinner. The mind stops asking what these lives are like and begins to notice how they feel. Slow, even, unconcerned with outcomes, present without tension. This feeling does not belong exclusively to distant worlds. It appears here as well, in quiet moments between thoughts, when attention drifts without direction, when the mind is no longer trying to solve anything. In that sense, imagining other forms of life is not an escape. It is a return to a softer mode of awareness, one where existence does not need to justify itself, one where presence is enough. In many of those worlds, life is inseparable from environment. There is no clear boundary between being and surrounding. Action expresses the system rather than changing it. This kind of unity feels unfamiliar only because daily human experience is often fragmented. But there are moments when that fragmentation loosens, when breathing becomes steady, when thoughts slow, when awareness expands just enough to include the space around it without effort. At that point, the imagined forms of life no longer feel distant. They begin to feel parallel, not identical, but resonant, existing alongside us, not somewhere else, but as another possible way of being. These worlds suggest that life does not need to be loud to matter. It does not need endless growth or visible traces. It can persist quietly, adjusting only as much as necessary to continue. This idea can be comforting, especially at times when the human mind feels overstimulated, when there is pressure to become something, to move forward, to achieve clarity. The imagined lives of other worlds offer an alternative rhythm, one where nothing is demanded. They do not promise improvement. They do not offer solutions. They simply continue. And in doing so, They allow the listener to slow down without guilt. As the mind stays with these images, another shift happens. The listener is no longer watching these worlds from a distance. Awareness begins to move with them, matching their pace, adopting their restraint. Thoughts soften, definitions blur. The need to categorize fades. What remains is a shared sense of presence. In those worlds, life does not ask why it exists. It exists because conditions allow it. There is no internal debate, no requirement for explanation. Existence unfolds quietly, without commentary. Sitting with that idea can feel strangely relieving. It suggests that not everything needs to be understood. That meaning does not always have to be constructed. Sometimes it is enough to remain. Thoughts begin to behave differently here, less linear, less demanding, more like gentle movement than directed effort. Attention drifts without resistance, no longer pulled toward explanation or outcome. At this point, the imagined forms of life and human awareness begin to overlap, not in identity, but in state. Both exist without urgency. Both continue without striving. In many of those environments, awareness does not monitor itself constantly. It appears when needed and recedes when balance returns. The same pattern quietly emerges here, where attention relaxes without being directed. Nothing needs to be held tightly. Nothing needs to be pushed away. Focus floats between presence and rest, without effort or instruction. These imagined forms of life do not seek contact. They do not announce themselves. They do not require recognition. And yet, holding them in mind softens the sense of separation. They suggest the possibility that existence itself can be quiet, stable, and sufficient. As this sense settles, breath becomes more even. Muscles release without intention. Awareness drifts without concern, moving gently rather than following a line. There is no need to remain alert, no need to track every thought. The rhythm allows attention to come and go freely. In many of these environments, continuity matters more than awareness. Life persists whether it is noticed or not. This understanding loosens the need to stay engaged. Letting go becomes possible, not as an action, but as a natural shift. Nothing disappears into these worlds, and nothing leaves its place. A rhythm is simply shared, slower, quieter, unforced. This rhythm is not a belief. It does not require agreement or interpretation. It exists as a sensation rather than an idea. As motion continues somewhere beyond thought, presence remains here, unseparated. There is no clear boundary between these states, only a gradual easing. Life, whether imagined or immediate, continues quietly. Nothing presses toward resolution. Nothing moves toward conclusion. And the motion carries on, leaving space for what follows. As the imagined worlds fade into the background, what remains is not absence, but continuity. The sense that life, in any form, does not require constant attention to persist. It does not wait for explanation. It moves forward quietly, whether it is observed or not. Across those distant environments, existence never depended on recognition. Life continued because conditions allowed it to continue. No witness was required. No interpretation was necessary. Stability emerged not from meaning, but from alignment. That same principle applies here. Awareness does not need to remain active to be real. Thought does not need to remain focused to be present. When attention loosens, existence does not disappear. It simply becomes less defined. The other forms of life imagined earlier do not vanish. They do not retreat. They remain where they were, continuing in their own rhythms. The only thing that changes is the distance placed between them and awareness. As that distance increases, comparison loses relevance. There is no need to measure similarity or difference. Existence is no longer something to be evaluated. It is something that continues on its own terms. In many of those worlds, Nothing moved toward a conclusion. There was no final state to reach, no destination that justified the movement. Life adjusted, persisted, and remained within its limits. Here, that same lack of urgency begins to settle. The need to follow each thought weakens. Attention no longer needs to stay with every idea. It is allowed to drift without consequence. This drifting does not signal loss of control. It signals trust in continuity, the understanding that things do not fall apart when focus softens. The imagined lives of other worlds never required constant awareness to function. Systems corrected themselves quietly. Balance returned without effort. Continuation did not depend on vigilance. That same quiet correction happens here. Breathing remains steady without instruction. The body holds itself without direction. Awareness stays present without effort. At this point, the distinction between thinking about existence and simply existing grows thin. The mind no longer treats these as separate states. Thought slows, not because it is restrained, but because movement is no longer required. Attention rests without needing a reason. There is no problem waiting to be solved, no conclusion waiting to be reached. The sense of arrival fades, replaced by a quieter continuity that does not depend on milestones or outcomes. What matters is no longer where things are going, but that they are able to remain. Across the universe, imagined or otherwise, life does not move toward endings. It does not hurry to complete itself. It stays within conditions, adjusting gently when change is unavoidable, settling again when balance returns. Rest is not a pause between actions. It is part of how existence functions. That rhythm is not exclusive to distant places or unfamiliar forms. It is not foreign or abstract. It appears wherever effort loosens and persistence becomes simple. It is already present, even when it goes unnoticed. The worlds described earlier do not provide answers. They do not resolve questions or explain meaning. They only point toward a possibility that existence does not require justification, direction, or purpose to continue quietly and fully. As this possibility settles, effort gradually loses its role. Attention no longer needs to remain fixed or alert. It does not have to hold itself in place or follow a line of thought. Awareness begins to move more freely, drifting without scattering, present without needing to concentrate. Language, in this state, starts to feel optional rather than necessary. Words still exist, but they no longer anchor experience. Categories loosen, definitions fade. Description becomes secondary to presence. What remains does not depend on being named in order to exist. There is no pressure to translate experience into meaning. Nothing requires interpretation. Existence does not ask to be clarified or justified. It continues quietly, complete in itself, without explanation. Life, across those other worlds and the forms imagined within them, follows the same quiet principle. It persists without announcement. It does not signal its presence or ask to be recognized. Whether observed or ignored, its movement remains unchanged, continuing within the conditions that allow it to exist. In those distant environments, processes unfold without supervision. Balance holds without being monitored. Adjustment happens without instruction or intention. Continuation does not depend on awareness staying active. It happens because the system itself supports it. Here, that same pattern becomes easier to sense, not as an abstract idea, but as a steady condition. The way life elsewhere continues without attention reflects how presence can remain without effort. Nothing needs to be maintained. Nothing needs to be reinforced. Silence in those imagined worlds never interrupts motion. It allows it. Stillness does not end continuity either. It reveals how little movement is required for existence to persist across vast differences in form and condition. Nothing in those worlds presses toward a final state. Nothing pulls away from what is already present. There is no expectation of what comes next. Time stretches without direction, shaped by duration rather than sequence. What continues there does not require a conclusion. It does not move toward arrival. It remains quietly sufficient, unfolding according to its own limits. And as those worlds continue somewhere beyond reach or confirmation, the same sense of continuation remains here as well, without needing to be named or followed further.